On this episode of the Glory Hour, the discovery of a new six-planet solar system answers in Genesis astronomer Danny Faulkner shares about this recent celestial finding, and he's going to break down scientifically how God strategically created the universe. That's happening now on the Glory Hour. Welcome to the Glory Hour, where spirit meets culture. Super excited that you are joining us today, and make sure to subscribe to Cornerstone Television Network's YouTube channel so you can be in the loop and in the know about what's happening on the Glory Hour. You know, y'all, I am super excited because we're talking all about God and the universe. Can you see? From the stars, I put my little star necklace on. Can you see it? I thought it was kind of cute. But anyway, there are so many questions, there's so many thoughts and debates around this issue. And I think it's really important that we talk about it, that we discuss it. You know, as Christians, there's agnostics, there's all these different rules of thoughts. But when it comes down to it, there's a lot of amazing things that God has created in his design. And I truly believe my conversation with Danny Faulkner, who's an astronomer with answers in Genesis, will be an enlightening and eye-opening conversation just for you. So check it out. Danny Faulkner, he's an astronomer with answers in Genesis, is joining us. Danny, thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with us about the solar system, about space, and about the universe, and of course, about the glory of God.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
You know, Danny, I just want to ask you, there was news that just came out about the recent discovery of a six-planet solar system. I want to hear your thoughts. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, it's interesting. It had a number of surprises. They found six planets orbiting this star called HD 110067. I know that kind of rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? And they've been looking for exoplanets now for decades. They first started discovering them almost 30 years ago now. But when this one is very interesting because it has more than one planet, it has six of them. And the orbits are truly remarkable. They're what we call a resonance with one another. The innermost one and the second one out, the innermost one goes around three times, while the next one goes around once. And then when that second one goes around three times, the third one goes around once. And the fourth one, the next one goes 3-1 again. And then after that, there are two more that go 4 and 3. They're orbital periods. It's really interesting. We do see resonances in the solar system, but not among planets. We see them among satellites or moons, if you will, and also in the ring systems and asteroids and so forth. But this is fascinating. It suggests that maybe there's something going on with how these things formed in the past. That's been the kind of conjecture put forth. It's kind of problematic. We can talk about that a little more if you'd like. But the other thing is the sizes of these things. They're a little bigger than the Earth. They've been calling them little Neptunes because they're a little smaller than Neptune, about 2 to 3 times the size of the Earth. That refers to the diameter. They do have information on the masses of these objects, in which they can get the density, and density tells you something what they're made out of. And the densities suggest that these planets are more like the Jovian or gas giant planets, which include Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. They're not rocky like the Earth and other terrestrial planets in the solar system are like. And the fact that they orbit very close to the parent star is most interesting, because the theory they've worked out for how planets form would have those kind of planets very far from their stars. These are very close. So how do they form in the first place is the big question. And lest anybody ask, will these planets be able to support life, we define what's called the habitable zone around stars. And these planets orbit too close to they're inside of that. They're not inside the habitable zone. They're closer to the planet, to the star, than the habitable zone would be. The habitable zone is a distance from a star that a planet like the Earth would have a temperature that's in the kind of range of temperatures we have on the Earth, so that ice doesn't freeze all the time. You have a good atmosphere, you have liquid water, which is key for life. So no one's suggesting that these are somehow going to be places where you could find life. They're the wrong kind of planets and in the wrong places. So there's a lot going on here, and a lot of things we need to sort out and make sure people understand it's not telling us.
Danny, this is so fascinating, and just what you're explaining and talking about, because I know for a lot of us, when we hear the news, like when I got the alert on my phone, that I'm just first thinking like, oh, can like life exist on there? But what you're saying is, no, not necessarily. There's so much more research and exploration that needs to be done to understand more about this new solar system.
Yeah, that's been the motivation for looking for exoplanets. Planets, that's what exoplanets are, planets orbiting other stars. They're difficult to actually observe because, or detect even because they're so far away from us and so small. So the technology has come a long way. About 30 years ago, the technology developed to allow us to actually detect these planets. Two major ways are done is we look very carefully at a star, and if a planet passes in front of the star in our line of sight, then it can block out the light of that star by a tiny little bit. And that little, we call that an occultation, or excuse me, a transit. We call it a transit. And that transit report, it can tell us something about the size of that planet and also its orbital distance from the star in its orbital period. On the other hand, another way is we look at Doppler motion in the orbit of the star. If a planet orbits around a star like this, by Newton's third law of action reaction, the star actually orbits around the planet a little bit. The planet may move a lot like this, but the star will move a little like this. And we look for that very subtle motion, and that will tell us the mass of those planets we may find. So the technology is amazing because you have a lot of noise in the data. But about 30 years ago, they figured out ways to do that with the modern ability to do that. And since then, we found about 6,000 exoplanets, which is a huge number. And the motivation behind this is got kind of an evolutionary touch to it. We'd all like to know if there are other planets out there, but even more importantly, is there life elsewhere in the universe? You see, if life evolved naturally on the Earth, then you would expect it would have happened elsewhere in the universe. Otherwise, the Earth would be unique. And if it's unique, then it's very special. And that kind of drags you right back to creation again. So this search for exoplanets has been fueled by this attempt to try to prove somehow that evolution's true. And the gold standard is to look for stars in that habitable zone around, you look for planets in the habitable stars, for planets that are orbiting in the habitable zones around their parent stars. And we found a number of planets that are in that kind of sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone, you may call it. But that's more, there's more to it than just that. A planet has to have the right amount of mass. If it has too little mass, it doesn't have an atmosphere. If it has too much mass, it has the wrong kind of atmosphere. We think the perfect atmosphere for life is a nitrogen-based one, like the Earth has, no surprise there. You must have some oxygen as well, and a few other things as well. All of it diatomic, we say. That's 2 atoms per molecule. That's important to get the right temperature regimes on these planets. And you know what? After finding about 6,000 planets, they haven't found any that are truly Earth-like. Occasionally, you'll hear a story in the news about an Earth-like planet found. When I do that, see that, and hear that, I go look it up, and I can find 2 or 3 things wrong with the star or the planets themselves that rule it out. Now, I think if you would have gone back 30 years ago, and you would have asked scientists, astronomers, and said, when you found nearly 6,000 exoplanets, how many of those would be Earth-like? I believe the answer would have been in the hundreds. The estimates would have been. Well, here we are, 6,000 or so exoplanets. Not one of them is Earth-like. So one of the things we're finding about these exoplanets is just how exceedingly rare, even to the point I would say of being unique, that the Earth is. And that has many ramifications upon the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe. It's telling me that I think life is so rare as it's probably non-existent outside of the Earth.
Danny, I'm just taking a moment to let this all sink in, because first I feel like right now we're all a little bit we're in class, astronomy class right now, because I didn't even know there was 6,000 exoplanets that existed. That's fascinating. That's remarkable. But even to hear that the way that God designed Earth and that all the other things, like it's a divine design that we are in Earth, that he has everything set up perfectly with the oxygen, the distance from the Earth from the sun, and everything else, that life exists here on Earth, only on Earth. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that, the divine design that is in Earth and points to creation?
Yeah, we have what's called the right distance from the sun, as I've already mentioned. But the distance is not sufficient. The moon is the right distance from the sun, but it's dead as can be because it's too small to have the right kind of atmosphere. And I've mentioned that that right kind of atmosphere has to be diatomic, and the atmosphere of the Earth is around 99% plus diatomic. You do need a little polyatomics in there, things like methane, carbon dioxide, water vapor. They make trace amounts in the atmosphere because it produces a greenhouse effect. I used to ask my students, is the greenhouse effect good or bad? And given all the talk about global warming and climate change, almost all my students would say, yeah, it's bad. And I'd say, well, actually, the answer is yes, it's both good and bad. We need a little bit of those greenhouse gases, the polyatomic gases, to produce enough greenhouse effect so that at night the atmosphere doesn't become super cold. You know, we would have even in summer we would have temperatures that would plunge well below zero at night if it weren't for those polyatomic gases. But you can have too much of a good thing. That's what the problem with Venus is. It's made up of carbon dioxide, so it has this extreme greenhouse effect. So there's a very narrow range of the kind of atmosphere that you can have for life to exist. The moon is a ancillary thing to the Earth. It orbits around, everybody knows that, but what they don't know is it has two unique properties. Number one, it's pretty massive compared to the Earth. The Earth's mass is 81 times that of the Earth, so you might think 81 to 1, that's a pretty big range, pretty big lopsided in favor of the Earth. But as it turns out, the other planets are much greater. The smallest ratio you're going to find out there is around 4,000 or 8,000 to 1. And most of the planets outweigh their satellites by hundreds of thousands or even millions to 1. The other unique property of the Earth's of the moon is the fact that it follows an orbit that's very close to the plane we orbit the sun. Normally, what would happen is a satellite would orbit its planet above its equator. Most of the large satellites, natural satellites in the solar system, do that. Our moon does not. So it has a unique orbit and a unique mass ratio. Well, everybody knows the Earth's orbit is Earth's rotation axis is tilted 23.4 degrees, which causes our seasons. What most people don't know about, though, is the fact that the forces acting in the solar system would cause that to change. It would increase to decrease to 0, and then it would go towards 90. It would take a long time to do this, but the Earth's rotation axis would slowly change. Now, if it's not tilted at all, you would realize there would be no seasons, and that would not be a good situation. Well, if it's tilted most of the way over, when that happens, then most of the Earth's surface would be simultaneously in the Arctic or Antarctic and in the tropics. I think everyone understands that's a problem. So why doesn't the Earth do that? Well, it's the moon. The moon stabilizes the Earth's tilt, keeping it with about a 2-degree range. It varies slowly within about 2 degrees, no more. And the reason why the moon can do that is, number one, it has a large mass compared to the Earth. And number two, it has that unique orbit that follows around the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun, not in the plane of the Earth's equator. Now, you can say that's a coincidence, but I have to ask, how many coincidences are you allowed to have before you're going to realize maybe they're not coincidences at all, such as the right size the planet has, the right distance from the sun, the right atmospheric composition, and on and on and on it goes. And we're seeing this play out with these exoplanet discoveries. We're not finding Earth-like planets at all.
Wow. Wow. I'm just like, my mind is blown, like everything that you're just sharing, because just thinking of the way that the Earth is designed, the tilt and with the moon and everything is perfectly set up. And even you just pointed to something and said something, Danny, that this discovery, the exoplanets, is pointing to the fact that God was like, I created the Earth for a specific purpose and reason. And he is the God of the universe, but there's a specific divine design on the Earth. Can you share with us like what your thoughts are, just even when you hear these discovery of all more of these exoplanets that are happening, but really what God is saying in the midst of it of my hand is on my creation on Earth?
You know, we recognize design when we see it because we're expecting to see it. You know, if God is the creator and he's made the world, he's made everything around us, then you expect to see design there. And there are designs that not just for necessity like this, but also designs of aesthetic things, beauty, for instance. I like to talk about solar eclipses. I went one in 2017. It was my second total solar eclipse. I'm going planning to go up in totality in April of 2024 to see the totality once again. I don't know if have you ever seen a total solar eclipse, Cindy? Sydney?
I don't think so.
Ah,
When's the
you have to
last
try to
one?
get this one in 2024 because
Okay.
it is the most remarkable thing I have ever experienced. People, see photographs, you hear descriptions, none of them do it justice. You have to really experience it. And I do mean experience it to get it because there's so much going on. It has an effect on people. You know what it does to me?
Hmm.
It shuts me up. I am dumbstruck. I don't say anything, and people who know me well are just stunned. They don't believe that you can almost charge admission to have people see me shut up for something that shuts me up. But it's truly incredible. You see this thing up in the sky, and everything gets dark, but it's more than that. This thing on the sky, the corona around the sun, it looks surrealistic. It doesn't look real at all. And what's interesting is the fact that the the sun is about 400 times larger than the moon, but the sun is also 400 times farther away. So that means that in the sky, the sun and the moon have about the same angular size, about a half degree. So when the moon passes in front of the sun, it usually, not always, will completely block the sun out. And if the moon were a little smaller or a little farther away, that would never happen. We would never get total solar eclipses. And if you examine the natural satellites or moons of the other planets, you'll find out that none of that exists on the other planets. There are some satellites that make eclipses, but they're grossly over total. So eclipses are pretty common, and they're not that spectacular. Only on the Earth are total solar eclipses, fantastic and spectacular and rare.
Wow.
And this is the only planet on which it matters. So God is also an artist. It's not just he's an engineer making a perfect environment for us, but he's also an artist giving us some things to really enjoy. But you know what? If you're not a creationist, you view the world very differently. You view it in terms of just chance processes. And so you don't expect to see design, so you don't look for it. And consequently, you can look at the design and not even see it because your worldview doesn't allow it. And I look at this new exoplanets, the six planets in one system we found, and I mentioned the resonances, the 3 to 1, 3 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 3, 4 to 3 that these things have. They're all, and by the way, the outermost one, it goes around once when the innermost one goes around 6 times. So these numbers keep coming up, and it looks like a really remarkable thing. Well, I've been hearing reports on this, and they're discussing the fact that this is the way we think that solar systems initially formed, that they had this, and then events took place over time to mess everything up, move the planets around, change their orbit, so they're no longer in these nice resonances. Well, wait a minute. They say the solar system is 4.5 billion years old, and it's gone through this process already in the past. Do you know what the age estimated on this planetary system is?
What is it?
8 billion years, almost twice as long as the supposed age of the solar system. So how is it that this one somehow escaped all of those interactions taking place? I've never heard them discuss that. That's the first thing that occurred to me. It's an old system, older than the Earth solar system is, but yet they're saying that it somehow pristinely preserves the initial makeup situation of these things. And you shouldn't, as I mentioned before, you shouldn't have gas giants or gaseous planets this close. They shouldn't have formed in the first place. That was the theory they worked out when I was very young about how the solar system formed. You get these gaseous planets far from the stars. You don't get them close in. And what we've been finding with all these exoplanets is you get gas planets really close to their parent stars, like we have in this case. That completely flies in the face of their evolutionary theories. So much so that, get this, many secular scientists, these are not creationists, secular scientists, astronomers are now saying that the solar system may be very rare, even unique. Imagine that. We've been saying that all along, and suddenly the evolutionists are on board with us, but for very different reasons.
This is so fascinating, Danny. And as you're just talking and explaining, about the creation and what God is doing, I just want you have a very thorough background in astronomy. Just can you share a little bit of like your journey, your story, your background? I mean, because I think what a lot of people we see, there's this whole battle, like creationists versus evolutionists, and they think that creationists are just wacky, but God, like, there's a lot of research and things that go into it that prove the creation story. So can you just share about your background, your story? I mean, you are a very astute and studied man.
People ask me how I got interested in astronomy, how I got into it. And some of my earliest memories are sitting on the front stoop of our house, looking up the sky at night and being fascinated with the stars. I was maybe almost 5 years old when that happened. I might have been even younger than that, but from where we lived at the time. So I've always been fascinated with the stars. I was born into a Christian family. My father and mother at the time were preparing to enter the ministry when I had that experience with seeing the stars at night and really being fascinated with them. Um, I was born again at age 6 through a vacation Bible school through a church that my father founded. And when you're born again at age 6, you don't have a big long list of sinful things that you've done in the past. So I was kind of innocent through the whole thing, and I was able to drift for the next 9 years in school and such. It was a small town, 30,000 people, and the people in the neighborhood, people at school knew I was a PK, that is, preacher's kid, but they didn't really think of me as being a Christian. I don't think they did. That wasn't the impression I got. And believe it or not, a Christian and a PK are not the same thing. You can be a Christian and not be a PK. You can be a PK and not be a Christian, as it turns out. So I was beginning my sophomore year of high school, and a lot of things happened that year, really key in my development. I discovered that there were some Christian young men in the school that were living vibrant Christian lives. Everybody knew they were identified as Christians, and that stung because people thought of me as being a PK, not a Christian. So I resolved to make some changes in my life at that point, and I did, to be known as a Christian rather than a PK. I also discovered that you could make a living doing astronomy. I never thought about that before. I thought, wow, that's cool. Then I found out I had the ability to do that. And then the third thing I discovered there was the fact that I believe that was my calling in life. I came under the influence of a man named Henry Morris. Many people recognize that name. He was one of the co-founders of the modern creation science movement 60 years ago. And he had a strong influence and change in my life. And partly through his work, I began to realize, hey, I can be a scientist. I can be an astronomer for God's glory. So I began to prepare myself even in high school. I went off to Bob Jones University, where I studied math and some physics, and then I went to Clemson University, where I got a semi-tiger rag in the back there, and I got a master's degree in physics, and then I went to Indiana University, where I completed a master's and PhD in astronomy. I've had 45 years experience studying eclipsing binary stars and some other related things. I was a professor at the university for more than a quarter century. I was a full professor. I was tenured. The University of South Carolina, Lancaster, very good place for me. I thrived there, and I couldn't be prouder of my institution. But I always thought if I was going to retire, that is, stop working for the university, I wanted to pursue creation studies full time. And so when I was there 5 or 10 years, that was kind of a distant thing. When I hit about 20 years, I wasn't so far away anymore. So a little more than a decade ago, I had an opportunity to retire a little early. And that allowed me to leave. And had I not had that desire to come up here, I would have stayed there, still would be there teaching, I do believe. But I had this desire to come and work for Answers in Genesis. And so I began here in January of 2013. And it's been remarkable. Full-time, I research creation studies. I'm in the research department here. I do some speaking. I run our outreach programs dealing with astronomy. But I do get a chance to write quite a bit. I've written more than a half dozen books over the years dealing with creation and astronomy. And it's just really, I've had 2 wonderful careers. When I came here, I thought maybe this was my second career, but since I've come here, I've begun to realize that maybe this is my career. The previous 58 years is simply prologue and preparation. But I tell people I'm way ahead of Moses. He didn't get his career going until he was 80. And poor Noah, he was 500 years old. So I'm way ahead of those 2 guys.
You are way ahead, but you're doing so much for the kingdom of God. And one of my favorite things, Danny, is I always love to hear people's stories of God has given birth this dream and this desire, and just to see it unfold step by step, that where he's taking you. And I just love I always have like a passion of hearing people when they went to college and saying like you're in the world, so to speak, but you understand different principles. And then he calls you into Answers Genesis and just with your faith and with the scripture, and you're just seeing it all come alive. Like you're just seeing everything back up what God is saying. So was ever a moment where specifically like you made like in your research or your findings, you're like, oh my gosh, this really points to God. This really points to the whole creation story that really just left you awestruck?
I can't say there's a single moment, but there have been a lot of aha moments along the way. The realization about solar eclipses, the realization about the interaction of the sun and moon. I didn't know that stuff starting out, and one by one, I learned these things, and I've got an eye and an ear for design arguments. I've been wrestling with design in astronomy for a long time. I think sometimes my colleagues see design where there is none. So I've been wrestling with trying to work that out. But that's one of the biggest things that really motivates me is to try to, can I get a handle on how can I recognize design and know the purpose of these things? Sometimes we can recognize design in things, but we may not know what the purpose of that design is. And that's to me is frustrating because I want to know. I want to know more. I want to know more about these things.
Danny, I love so much just hearing about your journey and your story. And I'm just curious, what scripture, is there one in particular that really just stands out to you that highlights it's a call in your life and also the work that God has done through creation that really speaks to you and means a lot to you?
I graduated from Dayton Christian High School in 1972, and they asked the seniors to provide a life verse, and other people were doing like Philippians 4:13 and things like this. Mine was a bit different. I put Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies above proclaim his handiwork. And I think people at the time may have been a little puzzled about that. I think later on they found out what I was doing. They said, okay, that made perfect sense. But even back in high school, I like Psalm 19:1 because it sums up my motivation. God's glory is declared to us in the world around us, especially in the astronomical realm. And I view it as my job as an astronomer for God's glory to share that with believers and with the unbelieving world as well. And that's why that verse has always been very special to me.
Danny, I love that verse so much too. It's one that always is in my heart. Even before our conversation, I was just thinking about like the heavens declare the glory of the Lord, and how many times, you go out, you see a sunset or you see a sunrise or the stars, and just to take a moment just to behold everything that God has created. It's so stunning, to think that God was so mindful. Like he could have made the earth any kind of way. He could have made us any way, but he was so loving, so gracious, so kind. And he wanted to put himself on display. Is there even, I know you like you talked about the solar eclipse and just even like the star and the moons being like orbiting and doing in your line of research and work and seeing how that all points to God. Is there anything else in creation or like a favorite spot you like to go or you like to see that you're like, I just love looking at God's glory?
Oh, funny you should mention that. Just yesterday, I paid another visit to my favorite place in the world. It's this little place in eastern Kentucky, about 2 hour drive from the Creation Museum called Red River Gorge. It's a place with hundreds of natural arches, deep canyons, streams, deep forests, and I never spend enough time there. I love that place, and we even do field trips here at Answers in Genesis. If I could put a plug in for that, in the spring and in the fall, late summer, we do field trips. We've got two scheduled for 2024. You can go to our website, answersingenesis.org, and sign up and maybe get a little taste of what really excites me about Red River Gorge. It's interesting that an astronomer is really into rocks, but I really those rocks down there really do rock. I love that place.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, we'll definitely check it out, and just checking out Answers in Genesis, checking out their YouTube page, and just any fun things that you have coming up, Danny, with Answers in Genesis, anything that you're working on that we can let our viewers know to go check out and support you guys?
Not any super big projects. We're starting to work on some projects beginning of the year on UFOs and ETs and flying saucers. I've written a little pocket guide and I've written a few times about it, but I'm going to be uh, taking a bigger presence in this and kind of taking the direction I would like to see Christians go with all of this. So that's my upcoming project early in the year. I got other things going on, but that's probably the biggest thing right now weighing on my mind.
Oh, Danny, well, you just brought up UFOs and flying objects, so I definitely could you talk a little bit about that? Because I know that is such a big thing. I remember, so I have like a kind of a story to share. Like I remember, this is way back. I wasn't Jesus, but I remember I was trying to talk to this guy. Danny, don't be mad at me. But I remember he was talking about like, oh, I believe in UFOs and all these things. I was so confused. I was like, I don't know about all this. So I would love to hear your take on UFOs, flying saucers, all of that.
That's going to take a while, but I'll give you a short, real short version of it. First of all, I think there's far less to explain than people realize. A UFO is an unidentified flying object, and everyone's seen those. If you've seen something in the sky, you know what it was, it's unidentified. So it doesn't mean they're flying saucers. Vast majority of them are misidentifications of known things, aircraft, spacecraft, aurora, all sorts of things. And then there's some hoaxes. It leaves only maybe 1 or 2% we haven't explained, but just because we haven't explained them doesn't mean that we can't explain them. We just don't know what the explanation is yet. So I'm very skeptical of claims of these things being supernatural or being visitations from other solar systems, other planets, ETs coming here. I think it's not nearly as fun to say that, but that seems to be that's my big concern about all this. And what really I think motivates all the fascination with ETs is, again, getting back to evolution. I pointed out before with exoplanets. If life evolved on the Earth, then you'd expect to life evolve elsewhere. That's why they want to look for planets like the Earth elsewhere in the universe, and we haven't found any yet. But when it comes to flying saucers and ETs, well, that would also amount to a proof that there's life elsewhere in the universe, because where else would they come from if they're not from here? So I think that really drives the fascination with flying saucers and ETs. I think if you talk to people who are really deeply into this, you'll find out they believe in evolution. They're not creationists for the most part. And so I want to kind of redirect our attention with I think a more biblical approach to these.
This is really interesting and fascinating. My mind is just like, oh, wow, there's so much in science, but I think I'm just grateful for men like you, Danny, that, have given their heart to Jesus, given their heart to the Lord, and you're using your work to just point people to Christ, to point people to God, because I know this is, in my generation, I'm a millennial, is that this is a big strife thing, division that happens with this whole idea with science and then with God. There's people that want to be atheists. I mean, I think these are important conversations that we need to have, because my generation, I don't know if you have children my age, it's a big contentious thing in the culture.
Yeah. And that's what Answers in Genesis is all about, bringing answers to people, questions like this. And I appreciate Cornerstone Television for the same reason. They have a commitment that we have to the truth and to Scripture, and to sharing the wonder of creation and the fact that we can trust Scripture. It is authoritative. It tells us what we need to know from the source of everything we know as well. So I think our two ministries overlap very nicely, and I'm great to be a partner with you on this.
Yeah, well, I am so grateful for your yes. When I reached out, I was like, oh, please, I hope you could talk to me. And I just love our conversation. I love your spirit and just all that you shared. I hope everybody, as they're watching, we're taking notes of what you explained and dived into. I'm really excited for the projects that you have coming up, and we'll definitely love to share that with our audience and viewers as well. So, Danny, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your heart. And do you have any final parting words that you want to share with our Glory Hour family?
Well, keep looking up. Some people say in astronomy, but also don't be turning your head away from the Creator in form of the creation. You need to remember what is behind it, who is behind the creation we have. Remember Psalm 19 and the fact that Romans 1:19 and 20 says we're without excuse, because God has made His existence known to us through the world around us.
So well said. Well, thank you, Danny. We love you, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
If you are fascinated and want to learn more about the solar system, I want to tell you about this. Cornerstone Television Network has a show called Origins, and it has a special coming up all about the planets. Take a look at this trailer.
When we look at our solar system, what do we see? Heavenly bodies created by God as described in the Bible, or objects that were all formed from a cloud of gas billions of years ago, as secular scientists say? Which account is true? Let's go on a journey to each planet in our solar system and see how each one contradicts secular models and is consistent with the creation account. Coming up on today's edition of Origins, Our Created Solar System Part 1 with Spike Psaris.
Super exciting. I'm definitely going to be tuning into watching it, and make sure you watch the special, and you can check it out by going to Origins playlist that is right here on Cornerstone Television Network's YouTube channel. You don't want to miss it. So you know what? This episode has been focused so much on the universe, and I thought it would be appropriate to give you a glimpse of our world from outer space, right? We're talking about planets, exoplanets. We're talking about God creating the universe. Well, we got to see the creation, right? So I found this video on TikTok from the International Space Station hovering over Earth and a view of the Middle East. Take a look at this.
You can see the full Nile River out in the distance there. This is one of my favorite views. One of my favorite passes is coming over this corner of the Middle East, Africa. It's almost always clear. Oh, there's cool. That's cool there. You can see all of Israel. Take a shot of that. And the Dead Sea. You can see the Dead Sea. So open this window. This is the last window I haven't opened up yet.
Oh, isn't this incredible? I mean, could you imagine this is your job of working on the International Space Station and seeing this incredible view of Earth? I mean, this is spectacular. It's so amazing. I just love seeing that view of Earth from, outer space. It's just sometimes it's even hard to fathom of we're all down there and they're all the way up there, and you can see all the continents, the Middle East, the Nile. So incredible, so fascinating. And so, one thing I just love finding videos like this and just seeing, the planets, seeing the universe, seeing the stars, because it is such a reminder that God is the creator of the universe, that, he was so mindful of us, that he created us as human beings in his image, in his likeness, so that we could experience the abundance of his creation, not only just here with the trees and the birds and the oceans and all the things that we experience here on Earth, but also I think about the vast universe that is just so beyond our comprehension and so beyond what we could even think or imagine. It's mind-blowing, but it's truly all points to the glory of God. And as always, I like to, when I think about the end of this podcast, as we're bringing it to a landing, with the glory hour, I always ask God something that's put in my spirit just to encourage you, just to speak to you. And I just want to share this with you because as I was praying, as I was meditating, as I was thinking about the show today, that God reminded me of a scripture about his covenant with day and night and how it's connected to us. So it comes out of Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah, chapter 33 and verses 20 to 22. I want to read this to you. This is what God says. God says, if you can break my covenant with day and my covenant with night, so that there will not be day and night in their season, then my covenant may also be broken with David my servant, that he shall not have a son to reign on his throne with the Levites, the priests, and the ministers. When I think about this, for a moment, that God has a covenant with day and night. And he's pretty much telling us that, if you can break this covenant, then the covenant with David's not going to happen. But newsflash, it's impossible for us to break God's covenant with day and night. And one thing I also love is that the verse also alludes to the fact that God's purpose and plan for the Messiah, Jesus Christ, could not be stopped. When we study and look through the scripture and we see Jesus' lineage and his bloodline was through King David, we see the covenant that God has made with day and night. I mean, God is a God of covenant, that he is all about fulfilling his plans and his purposes for us as humanity. And so I just want to encourage you that as you've been listening to this conversation that we had with Danny Faulkner, talking about the planets, talking about how God strategically placed the earth and the stars and the moon and everything in such a way that we could exist here on earth. And that every day that we don't have to worry about whether the sun's going to rise or when it's going to fall. God has that all in control, because he is the God of the universe. Then how much more does he have in control of our lives? And so maybe you're watching this and you might feel heavy or you might be dealing with things, but I just want to encourage you with this, that God is a covenant-keeping God, and he has a plan and a purpose for you. So I know sometimes we go through night seasons, we go through dark seasons, but just know that he is for you, that he is with you, and he loves you with an everlasting love. And because the sun the sun rose this morning and it's going to set, he has a plan for you. So we're just so grateful that you joined us for the Glory Hour. Make sure that you spread the word if you've been enjoying it. I love you all so much, the Glory fam, all my Glory brothers, all my Glory sisters. Stay tuned for every Wednesday that we're bringing you information, bringing you news, bringing you content where spirit meets culture so we can edify, uplift our spirits and gain revelation and truth, because you know what? Our God is a God of truth, and the truth will set us free. I love y'all. See you next time.